Arizona isn't just canyons and sunsets. It's an ancient archive carved into stone and clay. Here, the desert remembers. Every ruin, every shard of pottery, every carved wall tells us that people were thriving here long before Arizona had a name. In this journey, we'll walk through 7 landmarks where archaeology meets living memory. No myths without evidence. No ruins without story. These aren't just stones in the desert. They're voices of civilizations that shaped the Southwest. Don't forget to subscribe and give this video a like. And now, let's set off across Arizona's deep past. In the heart of the Sonoran Desert, where the sun bakes the earth into a pale, cracked crust and summer temperatures rise above 110 degrees, lived one of the most remarkable ancient cultures in North America. The Hohokam, ancestors of today's O'odham people, carved out an existence in one of the harshest environments on the continent. They did not just survive here. They engineered the desert into farmland. More than 1,000 years ago, while much of the world thought of the American Southwest as an empty wilderness, the Hohokam had built a system of canals so advanced that archaeologists still marvel at it today. Some ran more than 15 miles long, cut with stone tools and wooden digging sticks, carrying precious water from the Salt and Gila rivers into their fields. By harnessing these rivers, the Hohokam turned barren desert into green corridors of maize, beans, squash, and cotton. Their irrigation networks rivaled those of Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt, though they were built without the wheel, without beasts of burden, and without metal. Standing today on the flat desert around modern Phoenix, it's almost impossible to imagine the scene 1,000 years ago. Instead of highways and suburbs, the land was a patchwork of farms. Villages clustered along the canal banks. The smell of roasting corn filled the air. Cotton plants grew high. Their fibers spun into textiles that were traded far beyond the desert. The Hohokam did not live in isolation. Their pottery styles carried influences from Mexico, their seashell jewelry came from the Gulf of California, and their ball courts, sunken oval arenas, echoed Mesoamerican traditions. The name Hohokam itself comes from the O'odham word meaning all used up, or those who came before. Archaeologists adopted it in the 20th century to describe this culture that flourished between roughly A.D. 1 and 1450. For centuries, the Hohokam were masters of adaptation. They expanded their canal systems as populations grew, building hundreds of miles of waterways. They crafted red-on-buff pottery with geometric patterns, ground seeds with stone manos and metates, and built pit houses that offered cool refuge from the desert heat. But perhaps the most astonishing feature of Hohokam life was their ability to sustain dense populations in such a forbidding environment. At its height, the Salt River Valley may have supported tens of thousands of people. Phoenix today, the 5th largest city in the United States, literally sits atop the footprint of their ancient fields and canals. Modern engineers, when designing irrigation for the Salt River Project in the late 19th century, followed many of the same routes that Hohokam engineers had dug by hand more than a millennium earlier. Their culture wasn't only about practicality. The Hohokam built ritual spaces that speak of a deep spiritual life. Ball courts hosted gatherings where distant communities came together. Great houses, like Casa Grande, rose above the desert as monumental adobe structures, part residence, part ceremonial center. Their pottery wasn't merely functional. It carried symbols that may have expressed cosmology, clan identity, or myth. To walk among the fragments of Hohokam villages today is to sense a society where technology, trade, and belief were woven tightly together. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence of far-reaching exchange. Turquoise from New Mexico, parrots from tropical Mexico, and obsidian blades from distant volcanic fields all made their way into Hohokam settlements. Cotton textiles, likely dyed with vivid colors, may have been their own major export. The desert, once thought to be an obstacle, became a crossroads of commerce and culture under their hands. Yet the Hohokam story is not just about ingenuity, it is also about fragility. By the mid-1400s, their great canal system began to fail. Silt choked the waterways, floods damaged canals, and prolonged droughts stressed their fragile balance with the desert. Archaeologists believe social tensions rose as resources became harder to manage. Villages were abandoned. Ball courts fell silent. By the time Europeans arrived in the Southwest, the Hohokam as a distinct culture had vanished, leaving only their canal lines etched into the desert floor. Still, their legacy lived on. The Owadam people tell stories of the ancestors who first cut the desert open so life could flow. The very name, Phoenix, was chosen for the modern city to symbolize a civilization rising again on the ruins of an older one. And when you stand on the edge of a dry canal bed, still perfectly straight after 1,000 years, you can see why. The Hohokam were not simply desert dwellers. They were desert engineers, visionaries who transformed one of the harshest landscapes in North America into a center of life, trade, and culture. The story of the Hohokam is a reminder that even in the most unlikely places, people have always found ways to thrive. And in doing so, they left behind evidence that the deserts of Arizona were never empty. They were home to a civilization as innovative as any of the great cultures of the ancient world. To look at the Phoenix Valley today is to see two civilizations layered upon each other, one of concrete, glass, and asphalt, and one of canals, pottery, and sun-baked adobe. Both arose in the same place for the same reason. The desert, if mastered, could be made to bloom. Leaving behind the canals of the Hohokam, we step deeper into the Arizona desert. For centuries, travelers have stopped in awe at the Casa Grande ruins, a four-story great house built of caliche and clay, standing since the 14th century. In the flat desert of southern Arizona, where the Gila River once flowed with far more strength than it does today, rises a structure unlike anything else in North America. Built around the 14th century, this monumental adobe building is known today as Casa Grande, Spanish for the Great House. To early explorers, it seemed almost impossible that native peoples had raised such a massive construction out of earth and water alone. Even now, centuries later, it remains a mystery that continues to inspire archaeologists, tribal historians, and visitors alike. Casa Grande is 4 stories high, with walls that were once painted in brilliant white lime plaster. Constructed from caliche, a naturally cemented soil found in the desert, the Great House was engineered with remarkable precision. Builders carried water, clay, and plant fibers, mixing them into layers that hardened under the desert sun. Over time, the structure rose into a towering landmark, visible for miles across the flat valley. It was the largest single building of the Hohokam civilization, the people who had already mastered the art of canal irrigation and desert living. The Great House stands within a larger complex of walls, courtyards, and smaller rooms, suggesting that this was not an isolated building but the centerpiece of a thriving community. Surrounding the site are remnants of ball courts, storage pits, and irrigation canals that once spread like veins across the desert floor. What was the purpose of this monumental building? Scholars have debated for more than a century. One striking theory is that Casa Grande served as an observatory. Openings in the walls align with the movements of the sun and moon, allowing the Hohokam to track solstices and equinoxes with remarkable accuracy. This would have been vital for a farming society dependent on seasonal planting cycles. Others argue that the Great House functioned as an administrative center, a place where leaders organized irrigation systems, food distribution, and trade. Its commanding presence could have symbolized authority over the surrounding villages. A third possibility is that it served as a ritual or ceremonial space. Indigenous oral histories speak of sacred gatherings, where songs, prayers, and offerings connected the people to both the earth and the cosmos. In this sense, the Great House may have been less about controlling people and more about maintaining harmony with the natural and spiritual world. Excavations at Casa Grande have uncovered pottery, shell ornaments, stone tools, and evidence of long-distance trade. Seashells from the Gulf of California, turquoise from distant mines, and even copper bells from Mesoamerica suggest that the Hohokam were part of a vast network linking the American Southwest to cultures hundreds of miles away. The structure itself provides clues to its significance. The thickness of the walls, some more than 4 feet across, reveals both an engineering marvel and a determination to create something enduring. And despite centuries of exposure to wind and rain, much of it still stands, protected today by a giant steel canopy installed in 1932 to shield it from further erosion. For the Owadam peoples, who trace their ancestry to the Hohokam, Casa Grande is not simply an archaeological site. It is a place of memory and identity. Their oral traditions describe it as a sacred space, tied to ancestral stories of creation and survival in the desert. The building is often understood less as a puzzle to be solved and more as a living reminder of their deep connection to the land. These perspectives challenge the purely scientific view, reminding us that the Great House cannot be understood fully without listening to the voices of those who descend from its builders. Despite decades of study, Casa Grande's ultimate purpose remains unresolved. Was it a calendar in adobe, a palace of authority, or a temple to the cosmos? Perhaps it was all three at once, serving practical, political, and spiritual needs. What is certain is that Casa Grande represents the peak of Hohokam achievement. By the time Europeans first encountered it in the late 1600s, it was already abandoned, its walls weathered but still awe-inspiring. To this day, it stands as a monument to human ingenuity in one of the harshest environments of North America. Our journey now moves into the cliffs themselves. In the heart of Arizona's Verde Valley, high in a limestone cliff overlooking Beaver Creek, a remarkable structure clings to the rock face as if defying both time and gravity. Known today as Montezuma Castle, this five-story cliff dwelling is one of the best preserved examples of ancient architecture in North America. Its misnomer, bestowed by Spanish-speaking settlers who assumed a connection to the Aztec Emperor Montezuma, masks its true origins. In reality, it was built not by Aztecs, but by the Sinagua people, an ancestral culture whose ingenuity in surviving Arizona's harsh landscapes continues to astonish archaeologists. Rising nearly 100 feet above the valley floor, Montezuma Castle was constructed in the 12th century and inhabited for more than 300 years. With about 20 rooms arranged like a vertical apartment complex, the dwelling could house between 30 and 50 people at a time. Built of limestone blocks, mud mortar, and wooden beams, its placement high on the cliff protected its residents from floods, pests, and even potential enemies. To outsiders, the structure looks almost magical, a miniature city tucked into the cliffside. To the Sinagua, it was both practical and symbolic, a home that fused safety with community identity. The castle's position gave sweeping views of the valley, where fertile floodplains provided space for crops, and the creek supplied fresh water. Life inside the cliff dwellings was not unlike life in a tightly knit village. Families occupied different rooms, some designated for sleeping, others for cooking or storing food. The walls still bear the smoke stains of hearth fires, and archaeologists have uncovered grinding stones used to process maize, the staple of their diet. Alongside corn, the Sinagua cultivated beans, squash, and cotton, supplementing their agriculture with hunting deer, rabbits, and gathering wild plants. Storage was critical in a desert environment. The Sinagua used sealed baskets and ceramic jars to protect food supplies from insects and rodents. Higher rooms often served as granaries, keeping the community fed during lean seasons. The construction of doorways and ladders allowed movement between levels, while the cliff itself provided natural air circulation, keeping rooms cooler in summer and warmer in winter. But Montezuma Castle was more than a place to eat and sleep. Evidence suggests that some chambers were used for ceremonies, storytelling, and teaching younger generations. Within those walls, traditions and beliefs passed from elders to children, anchoring the Sinagua in a rhythm of life deeply tied to land and sky. When European American settlers arrived in the 1860s, they were astonished by the towering structure. Believing that only a powerful civilization like the Aztecs could have built such a castle, they named it after the Aztec Emperor Montezuma, though he had lived centuries later and far to the south. The name stuck, despite its inaccuracy, obscuring the story of the Sinagua. In truth, the Sinagua were neither Aztec nor Maya, but their own people, whose culture flourished between the 11th and 14th centuries. Their name, given by archaeologists, comes from the Spanish words sin agua, without water, a nod to the ingenuity required to thrive in arid Arizona. Yet, paradoxically, the Verde Valley offered more water and fertile soil than surrounding deserts, which is precisely why the Sinagua settled here. Excavations at Montezuma Castle have uncovered tools, pottery, textiles, and ornaments that reveal a culture both practical and connected to a broader world. cotton woven into cloth, shell beads traded from the Pacific coast, and turquoise suggest far-reaching trade networks. The Sinagua were not isolated cliff dwellers, but part of an interwoven tapestry of cultures across the Southwest. The architectural techniques also tell a story of adaptation. By building into the cliff itself, the Sinagua saved labor and materials, using the natural rock face as both wall and roof. Wooden beams cut from sycamores and junipers supported floors, while mud plaster smoothed interior walls. Though fragile in appearance, the structure has endured for centuries, an enduring testament to human resilience. The castle's communal spaces suggest it was more than a residence. Archaeologists believe some rooms were designated for rituals tied to agriculture and cosmology. Corn was not just food but a sacred element in many southwestern traditions, linking people to cycles of planting and harvest. Seasonal ceremonies, perhaps involving music, dance, and offerings, likely echoed within those walls, connecting the community to both ancestors and the spiritual world. The site also demonstrates a balance of defense and diplomacy. Its lofty perch would have discouraged attacks, yet the Sinagua appear to have lived in relative peace, trading widely with neighbors like the Hohokam, Mogollon, and ancestral Puebloans. The castle was not a fortress in the European sense, but a cultural stronghold, a statement of identity and belonging in a rugged landscape. By the early 1400s, the Sinagua mysteriously abandoned Montezuma Castle. The reasons remain debated. Prolonged droughts, resource depletion, or shifts in trade networks may have made the site unsustainable. Some scholars suggest social pressures or conflicts influenced the decision. Whatever the cause, the Sinagua did not vanish. They merged with neighboring groups, and their descendants live today among the Hopi and other Pueblo communities. For those descendants, Montezuma Castle is not a ruin but a place of memory, a testament to ancestral knowledge and endurance. Its preservation is a way of honoring those who came before, whose wisdom in shaping homes from stone and earth continues to inspire. Recognizing its significance, President Theodore Roosevelt declared Montezuma Castle one of the first U.S. national monuments in 1906. This protection saved the site from looting and ensured that its story would endure. Today, visitors can walk the trail beneath the towering cliff, gazing upward at the castle, imagining the voices of families who once lived within its walls. The monument also reminds us of the layered narratives of history. A name given in error still persists, but deeper truths emerge through archaeology and oral tradition. Montezuma Castle is not the palace of a foreign emperor. It is the enduring home of the Sinagua, a culture that found harmony with the desert and carved their lives into stone. Standing beneath Montezuma Castle, one feels a sense of timelessness. The walls seem to breathe the lives of those who built them. The laughter of children, the grinding of corn, the murmur of prayers carried on desert winds. Though abandoned centuries ago, the dwelling has not fallen silent. It speaks through its architecture, its artifacts, and the living traditions of native communities who still honor its legacy. It is not simply a castle, nor a ruin. It is a story written in stone and cliff, preserved against the odds, frozen in time, yet alive in memory. From the monumental cliff palaces of Montezuma Castle, our journey through Arizona's ancient past leads us deeper into the Salt River Valley. High above the Salt River Valley in central Arizona, massive cliffs rise like guardians over the desert below. Tucked within their alcoves are the ruins of a once thriving community, the Salado cliff dwellings, preserved today at Tonto National Monument. To stand here is to feel history pressed into stone. The walls of these homes still carry the fingerprints of the builders, and the pottery fragments scattered across the ground tell stories of both survival and exchange. This is no ordinary ruin. It is a window into one of the most fascinating cultural fusions of prehistoric North America. The Salado culture emerged around AD 1250, flourishing for nearly 2 centuries in the rugged Salt River Valley. They were not a single people in isolation, but a cultural mosaic, drawing from 3 of the Southwest's great traditions. The Hohokam, famous for their canal irrigation systems in the desert; the Mogollon, who built pit houses and painted distinctive geometric designs; and the ancestral Puebloans, master architects of multi-story dwellings. The Salado blended these influences into something uniquely their own. They were farmers, potters, traders, and community builders. Their way of life was born from diversity, a reminder that the ancient Southwest was a crossroads of peoples and ideas. One of the most striking features of the Salado world is their choice of homes. They built multi-story dwellings directly into cliff alcoves, high above the valley floor. The reasons remain partly speculative, but archaeologists believe there were both practical and cultural motives. The cliffs offered protection from enemies, a commanding view of the valley, and natural insulation against the scorching summers and cold desert nights. Building within the rock itself created a sense of permanence. The largest dwellings contained dozens of rooms, connected by ladders and doorways, almost like apartment complexes suspended in stone. From below, the sight of these structures must have been awe-inspiring, homes that seemed to grow out of the cliffs themselves. Perhaps the most famous legacy of the Salado is their polychrome pottery. Unlike the single-colored or simple designs of earlier traditions, Salado artisans painted bold, geometric designs in black, white, and red, often on the same vessel. Some depicted abstract spirals, others stylized figures or symbolic motifs. This pottery has been found far beyond the Salt River Valley, evidence of long-distance trade networks. It was more than utilitarian. The vessels carried meanings, possibly religious, possibly social, that archaeologists still debate. To hold a piece of Salado pottery today is to hold proof of a culture that valued both artistry and communication across borders. Daily life in the cliff dwellings must have been as complex as the architecture itself. Families likely shared multi-room homes, with spaces for sleeping, food storage, and communal gatherings. Corn, beans, and squash formed the agricultural backbone, grown in small plots near the river. Pottery and grinding stones suggest the preparation of food was constant work, while storage rooms packed with dried maize reflected the need to plan for hard times. Ceremonial spaces may have existed alongside domestic ones, where rituals tied the community together. Imagine the glow of firelight against adobe walls, the echoes of voices in prayer, the passing down of stories in the shelter of the cliffs. The dwellings were largely abandoned by the late 1400s, part of a wider transformation across the Southwest. When archaeologists began to study the site in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, they uncovered a wealth of artifacts, pottery sherds, stone tools, textiles preserved by the dry desert air. These discoveries painted a picture of a society both local and global in its connections. Yet much remains a mystery. Why did the Salado abandon the cliffs? Was it drought, conflict, or migration into other communities? The answers remain debated, but the ruins themselves endure as silent testimony. For modern indigenous peoples, including the Acamul-Owatum, Tohono-O'odham, Hopi, and Zuni, the Salado are not forgotten strangers but part of a continuum of ancestors. Oral traditions speak of migrations, of sacred ties to the land, of knowledge carried forward through generations. Visiting Tonto National Monument is not just about looking back into a lost past. It is about recognizing the living heritage of native communities who still call the Southwest home. The Salado cliff dwellings are more than archaeological sites. They are monuments to adaptation, resilience, and cultural exchange. They reveal how ancient peoples responded to challenges by blending traditions, innovating in architecture, and building connections across a vast region. Standing in the shadow of these ruins, one feels both the passage of centuries and the persistence of memory. The story of the Salado is a story of creativity in the face of harsh desert realities, and a reminder that history is not a straight line, but a woven tapestry of many threads. From the desert rivers and cliffside dwellings, our path now climbs upward, toward the Mogollon Rim, a dramatic escarpment that defines central Arizona. High in the mountains of eastern Arizona, the land changes. Towering ponderosa pines replace desert cactus, and sheer cliffs mark the edge of a vast plateau known as the Mogollon Rim. It is one of the great geographical divides of the American Southwest, a natural border between the Sonoran Desert and the highlands beyond. Yet this dramatic landscape is more than just scenery. It was once home to a civilization whose story remains less known than their neighbors, the Hohokam and the ancestral Pueblo. Here, on the edge of worlds, the Mogollon people thrived. And at the heart of their legacy lies one of the Southwest's most overlooked treasures, the Canishpa ruins, a 600-room pueblo that stands as silent witness to a forgotten chapter of American prehistory. Nestled near today's town of Fort Apache, Canishpa rises like a weathered monument of stone and adobe. In its prime, between AD 1200 and 1400, it was a sprawling village of some 600 rooms, arranged around plazas and courtyards. For centuries, this pueblo was a center of life, trade, and ceremony, linking the high country of the Mogollon Rim with the river valleys of southern Arizona and the deserts beyond. Unlike the cliff dwellings of Montezuma Castle or the canyon complexes of Chaco, Canishpa sprawled across open ground, an architectural choice that emphasized community and connection rather than defense. To walk through its remains today is to feel the outlines of a once bustling town, where families lived, crops were stored, and traditions carried on in rhythm with the seasons. What made Canishpa unique was not only its size, but its position. It sat at a cultural crossroads, where the traditions of the Mogollon, Hohokam, and ancestral Pueblo intertwined. From the Hohokam came irrigation farming techniques, ensuring maize, beans, and squash could grow in challenging environments. From the Pueblo world came the knowledge of multi-story construction, plastered walls, and ceremonial spaces. From the Mogollon heartland came artistry in pottery and textiles, blending bold geometric patterns with subtle regional flair. The people of Canishpa were not isolated. They were connected to the Salt River Valley, to trade networks that stretched as far as the Pacific coast and northern Mexico, and to a cultural tradition that valued both innovation and continuity. Archaeology offers us glimpses of what life at Canishpa might have looked like. Families likely occupied multi-room households arranged around plazas. Women ground maize on metates, the rhythmic sound of stone on stone echoing through the village. Men hunted deer and rabbits in the pine forests of the rim, supplementing the steady diet of farmed crops. Pottery shards reveal intricate designs painted in black and white, sometimes with hints of red, a Mogollon hallmark that later influenced Salado styles. Ceremonial life would have centered on plazas and kivas, where the community gathered for rituals tied to agriculture, cosmology, and social identity. At night, firelight flickered off plastered walls, and stories passed from generation to generation, preserving identity in an ever-shifting landscape. For centuries after its abandonment, Canishpa lay largely forgotten, known mainly to Apache communities in the region. That changed in the 1930s when archaeologist Byron Cummings, often called the Dean of Southwest Archaeology, began excavations. With teams of students and local workers, Cummings uncovered room blocks, pottery, and evidence of a vibrant community. He also initiated partial reconstructions of some walls, giving visitors a sense of the Pueblo's original scale. Yet, despite these efforts, Canishpa never achieved the fame of Mesa Verde or Chaco Canyon. Part of the reason lies in its remoteness. Part lies in the fact that the Mogollon, as a cultural tradition, has often been overshadowed by their neighbors in the archaeological narrative of the Southwest. The Mogollon are sometimes called the forgotten civilization of the Southwest. While the ancestral Pueblo are celebrated for their cliff palaces and the Hohokam for their massive canal systems, the Mogollon remain less studied and less understood. Part of this is due to the diversity of their settlements. They range from small pit houses to pueblos like Canishpa, spread across a vast region from New Mexico into Arizona. Their legacy does not fit a single dramatic image, and so their story is harder to condense. But perhaps it is also because the Mogollon remind us that history is not only about great monuments, but about resilience, adaptation, and cultural blending. Their contribution to the cultural fabric of the Southwest is undeniable, even if it remains underappreciated. By the 1400s, Canishpa, like many pueblos of the Southwest, was abandoned. The reasons remain debated: drought, social upheaval, migration, or a combination of all three. But abandonment did not mean disappearance. The Mogollon legacy lived on in the traditions of later groups, particularly among the Zuni, Hopi, and Apache, who preserved stories and practices that echo the lives once lived in places like Canishpa. For the Apache of the White Mountain region, the ruins were not relics, but part of a living landscape, bound into their own history and meaning. Today, descendants of many indigenous nations see Canishba as part of a wider ancestral homeland, a reminder that the past is not a closed book, but a thread woven into present identity. Visitors to Canishba ruins, now a National Historic Landmark, encounter low walls of stone and adobe, some stabilized during Cummings's excavations. Walking through the site, it is possible to trace the outlines of plazas and imagine the bustle of daily life centuries ago. The surrounding landscape of the Mogollon Rim adds to the power of the place: steep escarpments, endless forests, and skies that stretch unbroken to the horizon. It is a place both wild and deeply human, where nature and culture have long intertwined. The story of Canishba and the Mogollon Rim is a story of connection, of a people who lived between worlds, borrowing, blending, and creating anew. It is also a story of how history can overlook entire civilizations, not because they were unimportant, but because their contributions were quieter, less monumental, yet no less profound. To walk among the ruins of Canishba is to be reminded that the American Southwest was not built by one culture alone, but by many, each adding its own voice to the chorus of the past. In remembering the Mogollon, we remember that history is richer when it includes those at the edges, the borderlands, the ones who made life possible in landscapes where survival demanded creativity and cooperation. Our journey through Arizona's ancient past now turns toward the open plains near Winslow. Here, scattered across the landscape, lie the Hohokam ruins, villages left behind by the ancestors of today's Hopi people. North of Winslow, Arizona, along the banks of the Little Colorado River, the desert floor hides a story of movement, resilience, and memory. Here lies Hohokam State Park, home to a cluster of pueblos once occupied by the ancestors of today's Hopi people. To a casual visitor, the stone outlines of collapsed walls may seem silent. Yet to archaeologists and Hopi elders, they tell one of the most important stories of the American Southwest: the great migrations of the ancestral Pueblo people and the ties that still bind the past to the present. The ruins of Hohokam are not a single site, but a network of villages that flourished between the 1200s and the late 1300s. Archaeologists have identified at least 7 major pueblos in the area, the largest containing nearly 1,200 rooms. These were not isolated homesteads. They were thriving towns, built of sandstone and adobe, laid out around plazas and kivas. Their location near the Little Colorado River provided access to water in an otherwise arid environment, enabling farming of maize, beans, and squash. The fields that once stretched along the river are long gone, but the traces of irrigation ditches remain, evidence of adaptation and ingenuity in a challenging landscape. Scattered across the ruins are countless fragments of pottery, their painted designs still vivid after centuries in the desert. To archaeologists, these sherds are more than broken vessels. They are signposts of identity and movement. The designs at Hohokam reveal strong connections to both the ancestral Pueblo centers of Chaco Canyon and Mesa Verde and the traditions carried forward into the Hopi mesas to the north. Painted black-on-white bowls and corrugated cooking jars sit alongside more colorful polychrome wares, demonstrating trade, innovation, and cultural blending. Each fragment speaks of families who carried their traditions with them as they moved across the land, leaving a trail of artistry that helps map the story of migration. Beyond the villages themselves, the cliffs and boulders around Hohokam are etched with petroglyphs, spirals, figures, and clan symbols carved into desert varnish. These markings are not random art. They are migration records, messages left for future generations. Many Hopi clans today can identify their symbols among the carvings, tying living communities to their ancestral past. To walk among the petroglyphs is to stand at a meeting point of time, where the voices of the ancestors still speak through rock. They remind us that history here is not just about ruins, but about journeys, pathways, and the enduring memory of movement. Hohokam's position made it a true crossroads of the Southwest. The Little Colorado River Valley connected distant cultural worlds: the Chacoan roads from the north, the Mogollon Rim to the east, and the Hohokam desert settlements to the south. Archaeological finds show that shells from the Pacific coast, turquoise from New Mexico, and cotton textiles from the desert lowlands all passed through here. The people of Homolovi were not isolated villagers. They were part of a vast exchange network, linking communities across hundreds of miles. This flow of goods was matched by a flow of ideas, stories, and traditions that shaped the identities of those who lived here. By the late 1300s, the villages of Homolovi were gradually abandoned. Droughts strained farming, conflicts may have flared, and populations shifted. Yet this was not an end, but a movement forward. The residents did not vanish. They joined other migrating groups heading north to the Hopi Mesas. There, high on the arid plateaus, they carried with them their traditions, pottery styles, and clan symbols. For the Hopi people today, Homolovi is not a dead site, but a remembered stopping place, one of many along their migration journey before establishing the villages that still stand on the mesas. The stones of Homolovi may have crumbled, but the community's spirit lived on in Hopi identity. Modern archaeology began to investigate Homolovi in the 1980s, with excavations revealing the scale and complexity of the pueblos. Yet from the start, archaeologists recognized that this was not just a matter of academic interest. Hopi leaders made it clear that Homolovi was part of their living history. The collaboration that developed between archaeologists and the Hopi tribe became a model for respectful research, balancing scientific inquiry with indigenous knowledge and cultural sensitivity. Today, visitors to Homolovi State Park are encouraged not only to see the ruins as ancient structures, but also as sacred places that continue to carry meaning for Hopi clans. Walking through Homolovi today, one sees low walls of sandstone marking room blocks, pottery fragments scattered underfoot, and the endless sky above. Interpretive signs explain the archaeology, but the site itself invites deeper reflection. The wind across the Little Colorado carries a sense of continuity, as though the voices of those who once lived here still echo through the open plazas. It is a place where history, culture, and landscape intersect, reminding us that migration is not just a matter of geography, but of identity. For the Hopi, Homolovi represents the resilience of their ancestors, who adapted, moved, and carried their traditions forward through centuries of change. The story of Homolovi is not about ruins lost to time, but about connections that endure. From the painted pottery sherds to the petroglyphs carved into stone, the evidence here links ancient migrations to the living traditions of the Hopi people. It ties together the great centers of Chaco and Mesa Verde with the enduring communities on the mesas of northern Arizona. Homolovi reminds us that history is not just about the past. It is about the ways people carry their heritage forward, through movement, adaptation, and memory. To stand here is to stand at the crossroads of time, where the past and present still speak in the desert wind. From the ruins of migration and forgotten cities, our journey now turns to a place that is not frozen in the past, but alive in the present. Canyon de Chelly, in northeastern Arizona, is unlike any other archaeological site in the American Southwest. Where most ruins are silent remnants of vanished communities, this canyon is still alive. Navajo families herd sheep in its meadows, plant corn in its sandy soil, and ride horseback under sandstone cliffs that rise like fortress walls. To walk here is to move through time itself. Each bend in the canyon holds the memory of thousands of years of human habitation. The canyon walls preserve the architecture of the ancestral Puebloans, who began carving cliff dwellings into the sandstone alcoves nearly 1,000 years ago. Some of the best known are White House Ruin and Mummy Cave, precarious clusters of rooms tucked high above the canyon floor. From these lofty perches, families could defend themselves, store corn, and watch over the fertile bottomlands where they planted crops. Their masonry, small sandstone blocks mortared with mud, still clings to the cliffside, a testament to both their skill and their determination to survive in a desert environment. But Canyon de Chelly is not just about architecture. It is a living archive of rock art. Panels of petroglyphs and pictographs stretch across the canyon walls, depicting bighorn sheep hunts, spiral symbols, and supernatural figures with horned headdresses. Some are thousands of years old, dating back to archaic hunter-gatherers. Others were carved or painted by later Puebloan and Navajo artists. For the Dine, the Navajo people, these are not mere drawings but sacred records, reminders of their emergence into this world and their ongoing covenant with the land. Spanish chroniclers first encountered the canyon in the 18th century. By then, the Navajo had made it their homeland, fortifying themselves within its sheer walls. When Mexican and later American armies attempted to subdue them, the canyon became both a refuge and a battlefield. The scars of this history remain most painfully in the story of the Long Walk of 1864, when the U.S. Army, under Kit Carson, forced thousands of Navajo to leave Canyon de Chelly and march hundreds of miles east to Bosque Redondo. Many died along the way. Yet after years of suffering and exile, the survivors were allowed to return, and Canyon de Chelly once again became a place of life and resilience. The legends of the canyon run deeper still. According to Navajo oral tradition, Canyon de Chelly is tied to their emergence story, the sacred narrative of how the Dine came into this world from lower worlds beneath the earth. Spider Rock, a dramatic 800-foot spire that towers at the confluence of two canyons, embodies one of the most enduring myths. The Navajo say it is the home of Spider Woman, a powerful deity who taught their ancestors the art of weaving. Her presence is not symbolic, but real. Children are warned that those who misbehave may be carried up the spire and never seen again. Standing at its base, one feels both awe and humility, as though the stone itself holds wisdom beyond human reach. Archaeologists approach the canyon with respect, acknowledging that every excavation here must reckon with living traditions. While scientific study documents the construction techniques of the cliff dwellings or dates charcoal from ancient hearths, it cannot ignore the voices of those who still pray in the shadow of these walls. To the Navajo, the canyon is not a ruin, it is a sanctuary. Every planting of corn, every song sung at Spider Rock, every sheep corral built against the sandstone continues a line unbroken for centuries. Today, Canyon de Chelly National Monument is managed in a unique partnership between the Navajo Nation and the National Park Service. Visitors may enter only with authorized Navajo guides, ensuring that tourism remains respectful. This balance preserves both the archaeological record and the living culture that gives the canyon its soul. Few places in America embody this dual identity so strongly, at once a site of ancient ruins and a vibrant homeland. Canyon de Chelly forces us to ask, what does it mean for history to still be alive? Here, the answer is visible in every cornfield, every cliff dwelling, and every story told around the fire. The canyon is not frozen in the past. It breathes with the rhythm of the Navajo people, carrying their legends forward into the present and beyond.